Jeremy Dutcher is an Indigenous performer, composer, activist, and musicologist currently based in Toronto, Ontario. Originally from New Brunswick, Dutcher studied music in Halifax, which prompted them to delve into archive recordings reflecting their Wolastoqiyik heritage. After a long period of work, the end result is a powerful stage show and critically adored new album called Wolastoqiyik Lintuwakonawa, which has led them to tour the world, including 2018 stops at Guelph's Hillside Festival and Sackville's Sappy Fest. Jeremy and I connected recently to discuss their working history, the past and current state of Indigenous communities across Canada from their perspective, their new album, and much more. With in-kind support from Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, and Planet of Sound locations in Ottawa and Toronto, and of course, listeners like you who subscribe to this podcast, download episodes, and make flexible monthly pledges at patreon.com/Creative Control. This is the 408th episode of Creative Control, featuring Jeremy Dutcher with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hi, Jeremy. How you doing?
Hey, I'm very well.
It's nice to speak with you. Where in the world are you today?
Well, I just landed back in Toronto, where I have a place. I was in Montreal last night, and before that in Dawson City, Yukon, and Vancouver. So I've sort of been all over the place these days.
That is an interesting trajectory, really.
Yeah.
Vancouver, Dawson City, that kind of makes sense. It's still that's far, but then you all the way to Montreal, right across the country. Wow.
That was a long travel day, let me tell you.
But I assume you are happy to travel and spread your music around.
I mean, yeah, it is the line of work I've chosen, and I'm so happy to be doing it. Honestly, to get to go around and to some of these places and connect with the communities there has been really, really cool. So, yeah.
Is this a recent phenomenon for you? Were you a hard touring musician before the release of your latest record?
Not hard touring. No, definitely not. I had done some gigs around Toronto, and then I actually did a bit of a tour in Asia last year, which sort of came out of the blue, and then a little bit in Scandinavia too. Just kind of picking up these gigs where they came. But yeah, no. In terms of the not constant touring, but just frequent touring, I'll say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been since the record came out. So, and it's much nicer to do it, I think, once you have something tangible for people, to take away and to build a relationship with, because it was sort of felt weird a little bit touring when I was like, okay, here, well, not weird, but I guess just different. It's like you create a moment in a show and then you can't relive it. But now it's like you can actually gift people with something. And I'm so happy to share this music. So, yeah, it's been cool since it came out.
I was very fortunate to see you perform at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa during the Megaphono Festival.
Oh yeah, cool! I love that show so much with with a good friend of mine, Melody McIver.
That's right. Yeah, it was unbelievable, and I had never seen you before. I wasn't that familiar with you at that point, and my friends, in particular, my friend Stephen Lamke was excited to see you, and he provoked me to go, and he runs Sappy Fest in New Brunswick as well, so in Sackville, New Brunswick. So anyway, that was mind blowing, and I was struck by your presentation. You were singing. Some would say it was operatic singing, I suppose, and you were playing, you were playing kind of piano in the classical realm, but then you also were augmenting all of this with these recordings, and I think on some level, I don't mean to reduce your practice, and I forgive me if I am in attempting to capture it, but I'm hoping you can elaborate upon some of these things in terms of your current live presentation, if it's changed since that was back in February of 2018. So I don't know if that was an early show in this swing of things. Can you talk about your show and how it works?
Sure. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. It's sort of working in a couple different configurations right now, and that's allowed like me to be super flexible in terms of like the kinds of shows and venues I can do. I just had this experience like a couple weeks ago, and it was actually back at the National Arts Center. I played this Governor General's Award thing with the NACO. So I did this like massive gig with an orchestra, like doing my music. I was like, holy shit, like this is so cool. Mm-hmm. And then the next weekend, I was in the north end of Winnipeg playing for the Sagahiwe Festival, which is like an indigenous arts festival happening sort of in like the divested communities of Winnipeg. And just the juxtaposition of those like two audiences and communities is like so much how this project looks in terms of where it can live. So yeah, I think it's been really interesting to sort of be able to create different spaces and different kinds of live shows. What you saw was like very much sort of the piano reduction version of what I'm hoping to do and what I've been doing. But it's also like, I don't know, I'm quite process oriented. And so in terms of like how I write music, or at least this record anyway, was very much at the piano. So giving people, and with the archive, of course, as you mentioned. So sort of playing these piano arrangements, sort of how I first had intended them, and then playing also the recording to show sort of people where it's all coming from, right? And give people sort of a glimpse into that experience of like what it was like to actually go in the archive. And I think, I'm learning maybe to be a little less narrative focused in my shows, but definitely I like to tell stories all the time because I think.
Well, I thought the banter and that kind of, it's. I assumed you had said these things before, but it seemed kind of like extemporaneous explanations of things. I thought that was really helpful and inform things. And to be honest, I think I put you in an awkward position by jumping ahead to the live show instead of talking about the background of what you're up to, and I apologize for that. I was just thinking about the fact I've thought about your show a lot, like since I've seen it. It's the only time I've seen you play live, and I've just thought about it quite a bit, and and it really had an impact on me on some level. And so I guess, like I say, just to correct things here, we should actually go back and talk about how this record came to be and how you approached making it, because it's a very, from my understanding of what I've read and heard you or read interviews and things like it, I know it was a very interesting process. And for those who are unfamiliar with it, I actually think we should jump back. So can you talk about how this music came to be, and go back to your studies? In fact, I think it's relevant info.
Yeah, sure. So all the way back. long ago. Yeah, I mean, but it's kind of been this whole album is like a culmination of at least 8 or 9 years of work.
I assume some trial and error as well. Like I think
hugely.
I think I feel like what I saw was a refined, the process of a refinement in terms of trying to figure out how to do it.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. Doing that like tour in Asia where I had to do like in 1 month, I did like 17 shows, and you just have to sort of like, you have to be ready to go at the drop of a hat, and you really create a flow in building a show. Sorry, now we're talking about the show again.
No, well, the show is obviously a reflection and representation of this work. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. I feel like I've not had this chronological conundrum with other guests before, and I've been doing this a long time, but my initial, encounter with you was live, so that's what resonates with me. And then the record has come out; it's been celebrated and acclaimed. It's as we're speaking, it's nominated on the long list for the Polaris Music Prize. The critics are on it, and I know you've been doing lots of press and big press. So like there's been a lot of attention paid to it. But we must, for the sake of people who don't know what we're talking about, we must jump back and figure out where this all came from.
It's all about the process, so we gotta delve in. Okay.
Yes.
So Yeah, I mean, it all sort of started. Wow, how far do we want to go back? Okay, three generations? No, yeah, no. It's sort of like it started as like a seed that was planted from an elder of mine, actually, named Maggie Paul, and she lives back in New Brunswick, where my people come from. Our territory is sort of like runs mostly through like the western part of New Brunswick, into Maine and up to Quebec as well.
And
it's sort of
who do you represent, so to speak?
yeah. So our people are called Wolastoqiyik, and that's sort of actually that's the first word of the album actually, which is called Wolastoqiyik Lintuwakonawa, and so Wolastoqiyik is talking about it sort of translates to the people of the beautiful river. And that river is the Wolastoq River, which sort of runs down the western part of New Brunswick into the ocean, which is called the St. John River today by some. And yeah, so this elder of mine, she knew I was interested in like our traditional music. I always wanted to be around the drum, and she was like a great sound carrier for our people.
When did your interest in music of any kind begin?
Oh, that's the thing. That's the thing, because I was like, hey, how far do you want to go back? Because like,
no, let's go. Let's do it. Let's get to know you a little bit. Sure, why not?
I've been making music since I was a kid, for sure. It was always like my parents. We had this fireplace at home with this ledge on it, and every time somebody would come over, I would like just take everything, like totally clear it off the ledge, and take my little guitar and do a little show for people. And I was always like, we're very, very fortunate that we were gifted a piano. So we had a piano in the home too, which was like, I didn't realize at the time, but oh my God, such a gift,
Unusual for someone to have a piano?
Absolutely, yeah, totally. And my parents couldn't have afforded it either. It was gifted to us, and it was. Anyway, it was just music was always in the home. My brothers are all musical, and sort of show that in many different ways. My oldest brother is part of the local drum group and is really into traditional songs. And the brother closest to me is like a jazz musician back in Fredericton. So music was always around the home, but when I really started to go down this path was through theater. Actually, I was like a bit of a like eccentric weirdo in high school, and so the theater kids, they were my people, and it was a bit of a refuge in a way, being New Brunswick and all. So I sort of got involved in that, and then through talking with like mentors in that, I said, how if I wanted to take this to the next sort of step, right? What would I do? And they said, well, have you thought about classical music? And like, not really. Actually, I didn't really have much of a relationship, other than like what most people have of like, cartoons and like sort of those like public iterations of classical canon. But yeah, I didn't really know too much about it. So what do you suppose spurred them to suggest classical as a sort of a genre signifier for you to explore? Well, I mean, maybe they saw it in my voice, or yes, of course, yeah. I could have been, or I think like also, I was sort of given two paths, right? If they were like, if you want to go to theater school, that's one option. If you want to get like a super solid vocal foundation, and that's, you want to really sing. Sorry, not really sing. That sounds flippant. But if you really want to, get that strong foundation, like even if you don't want to be an opera singer, even going through that rigor and doing that kind of training is good. So, I took them up on it. Okay. So I applied, and I went to school in Halifax. But as a vocalist? Yeah, as a vocalist. Okay. Totally. Okay. Totally my focus. I actually didn't even play the piano at that time. It actually came through going to school and just having access to all these pianos. I knew how to play chords, I guess, but in a way of like actually composing at the instrument, it's like it's a different kettle of fish, I guess. Yeah. Right. Anyway, so yeah. What I noticed in these like institutional spaces was that music is just kind of done in a different way, and definitely in a different way than I was used to, right? And so there started to be for me like maybe a longing for like the kind of music that was made at home, or like just kind of a bit of a struggle of like, it's beautiful music, but it's the kind of spaces and the kind of like competition and the kind of like classism that's like inherent, I think, in like a lot of these spaces is really tough. So just trying to find a pathway through that, I really wanted to bring some of myself and some of my home to what I was doing. So, I sort of looked through the sort of what is considered canon in like classical music for like things of indigenous content, if there were composers like talking about it, or if there were actually like indigenous composers or what. I just started doing like research and digging into it.
Yeah.
And I found these like these set of 4 songs by this guy named Charles Wakefield Cadman, and he was like a turn of the century American like composer and non-indigenous, and he took these like melodies and sort of made these like songs around them, and I was like, oh, huh. But they're all sort of like kind of cheesy and like.
So wait, sorry, he's non-indigenous, but he discovered these indigenous musical pieces and then tried to adapt them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And so there was actually a group of composers, and again, I'm very research-based, and so I went in and started digging into these composers and who they were. So they're called the indigenous composers, and what they did were they just like non-indigenous people at the turn of the century, sort of like early 1900s, and there was also this boom in ethnomusicology where folks would go into these like communities with, and this is when recording technology was also really getting going as well. So they would go into these communities and start recording, and so all of a sudden
field recordings and whatnot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there was this massive explosion of like access to musics not of a Western classical canon. And so these groups of composers would like latch on to like certain ones. And so he wrote these pieces and I learned them and I performed them, and they're kind of like funny and, for an actual indigenous person to perform them, a little ironic, but it's like, I have this, Buffy St. Marie, I have this like profound love for this woman. And she always says, if you don't like what's on the menu, you got to go into the kitchen, you got to cook it up and show them how good it tastes. And I thought this was like, when I heard her say this, I was like, oh, that's kind of perfect. And that's kind of like what I want to do with this project, is because, when I was singing those songs by this white guy who didn't really have a connection to the community, or like, was just sort of taking the melodies and totally decontextualizing them. I saw that and I was like, oh, I could do better than that. I come from this from this community. So this was before the archive. I didn't know anything about that. This was just really just me trying to figure out my identity in school and like how I could mix who I was into what I was doing.
I want to ask you about your relationship to these kinds of archival field recordings, because on the one hand, I gather for you that they proved to be a treasure trove in terms of connecting to your heritage, and I know they changed your life. On the other hand, we've been reevaluating what the purpose of some of these recordings were and how they ended up being exploitative, how they ended up being a kind of fetishization of or an exoticization of various cultural forms and people. So is that all there for you? Like, do you have?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
No,
okay.
Totally. I think I struggled a long time with the anthropological project, as like as a thing, of this like cataloging. And I think there's, when I got to sit down and read this anthropologist's journal, some of the language he's using is super complicated, and it's like, oh my God, they were not doing this for like super innocent reasons, or like, there was this narrative of like, these people are dying, and so we need to collect their things before they're gone forever, and make them into objects,
Right.
And so it's all super complex, but
because on the one hand, I assume you're somewhat grateful for the work.
Oh, hugely, and that's one part of it too. I've come to like really connect with this this anthropologist, and because I'm so grateful that this has been collected. It's like, these songs, they were not sung in the community anymore. Like there was one song that I heard as part of this 100-song collection that I knew growing up. And so that was it, A lot of our songs, and Maggie explained this to me too, my elder, she says, a lot of the songs because everything went underground, we just, like, when things started to come back in like the 70s, we traveled around and we got songs from everywhere. And so the songs that I grew up singing, they weren't necessarily in my language. They weren't like really connected to place. And so it wasn't until I heard this archive and got to hear like the old songs that come from my territory, Wolastoqiyik. Hearing that archive, I had to like share that with people, because it was something that was so detached from the community. And these anthropologists, they go in, they collect, and then they just put in a museum. And it's like there's no, like, most people didn't even know that this record existed. And so for me, it's just like half of the work of this project is just actually trying to get the word out to like other Wolastoqiyik people that there's this beautiful archive. And it's not just songs. There's photographs, and there's there's stories in there, and there's so much that we can learn from, and so much power in that archive. And so for me, it was like just trying to dig that out and give it back to people, because that was sort of what the whole point is.
Am I correct in that there are very few people who can speak the language of Wolastoqiyik? Like, my understanding is what is it, in the hundreds of that, right? Yeah. So,
totally.
But do you speak it? Do you understand it?
I do, yeah. And so I'm rather fortunate in that way, because my mother's a speaker, and my aunt was like a language teacher, and not everyone had access to language teachings growing up in the home. So I'm very, very fortunate in that sense. That I have that.
Yeah. No, I can appreciate that. What kinds of themes lyrically did you discover, and in terms of what makes it onto your record, in terms of, and we never even got to that yet, and I suppose we should get to that first, because you've basically, if anyone, when people hear this record, if they haven't already, they'll notice that you seem to have adapted these pieces for your own, and sort of brought worlds together, so to speak, cultural worlds together, I suppose. So within that, while you're talking about that process, can you also sort of describe some of the lyrical motifs that go through the songs on this record?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So sorry,
it's my fault. I'm scrambling everything. Yeah, no, you were talking about how you came upon this archive, and you had this you had a classical training, and then you discovered the archive, and then something clicked, I suppose, is where you're at. Yeah,
great. Yeah, so
see, I'm helpful. I can help.
You're being very helpful, keeping me on track, and then knocking me off, and then back again.
Yeah, it's my fault.
It's a good game. I like it. But anyway, upon like going to that archive, because again, like Maggie sort of saw that I was trying to sort of blend these worlds together, and she knew that I was a singer, and she says, if you really want to know about the old songs, like the old songs from around here, you got to go to the archive. And that was the moment when I got to go and sit with this archive. And once I was able to like witness that, the path was clear. I was like, okay, this is what needs to be done. It needs to be a reconnection point back to the community.
And the archive is located in a museum?
Yeah, exactly. So it's the current like wax cylinders and all the sort of information sit at the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau.
Right.
So they're there, and it's and there's been a lot of really, really interesting like repatriation projects that have been going on in our territory and across the country. Many nations we're just like, we're taking our stuff back.
Yeah,
so,
that's great.
And I think it's really awesome. And mine's a little bit part of that. And I think that's pretty cool. But, there was actually just they call it Kmo Samsinagweden, which means the grandfather canoe. And that actually just came back to our territory in the last couple of years.
Sorry, it was like an actual vessel?
It was a canoe from the late 1800s that was taken because my people were like master canoe builders. It was sort of like one of our big things, because we were on the water so much. We were river people, So, anyway, so our canoes were like super renowned, and so they took one to England, and it was there since the 1800s, and just like I think it was 2 years ago, it came back.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah. And so there's a lot of these projects kind of happening, which I think is like super cool, and I'm super happy to be a part of that. But and that's sort of what the whole goal of this album was to like just make an accessible point for my people to like think about this archive.
And you did so in this bridge building way. Are you familiar with the record by Alanis Sobobsawin, the Bush Lady record?
Yeah, I sure am. I love that.
Yeah, and I spoke with her recently, and I was curious about the configuration, the musical configuration, because the music that backs her up, which I believe was chosen by the CBC in the mid-'80s, are all kind of classical instruments, if you will, like strings and horn sections, and meanwhile she's conveying, lyrics and ideas that pertain to her community and the indigenous community. So I found that fascinating, that there was this amalgam of Western instrumentation, European instrumentation, and yet this conveyance from here. So from her perspective, and on some level, I thought of her record when I think of your record, because it's in the realm of the same notion of bringing Western and indigenous culture together. What do you make of that? I mean,
that's a high honor. Thank you so much. I mean, she's like fucking icon in our community. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this.
Apparently you can. You did, so it's done. Yeah, go for it.
Can't go back now. Okay. She's such like an amazing light for our people. So that's a high honor. Thank you for saying that. But I suppose so. Yeah. In terms of like how my styles came together, it's just a confluence of everything that went into my bringing up, which is like, I'm sitting on these fences of these two worlds and like trying to bring something together, and letting these worlds speak to each other.
And what is that impulse though? Is it a gateway for either to enter either world? That's why I'm curious about it.
I suppose, a gateway, or just like, they're worlds that really haven't spoken to each other in I really struggle with the word authenticity, but sometimes it just works,
Sure.
But in an authentic way, they haven't spoken to each other, or it's been two people in conversation. And I feel very uniquely positioned, I guess, in that sense, where I have both a relationship with both musics now, and so it's like, when I create, I'm just creating at the center point of those intersections of my musical training and where I come from, and to root it but to always root it in language and culture was very, very important to me from even my time at school. I was trying to always find that answer of like how to do this in like an honest way and still speak truths. Certainly, like if to get into the lyrical content, there's some tough stuff on this one, in this record, and they might be little simple turns of phrases, and then, but for me, they're saying a lot, For me, it's like there's a track called Aguiden, which actually means canoe, I was talking about earlier, and there's in the B section of that song it says, "Waliu and Chosamagwin Madachwan Gidwismo," which means thank you for the water so no one will go thirsty. But when I say that, I'm talking about the fact that we still have nearly 100, long-term boiled water advisors in this country. Mm-hmm. And most of them, if practically all of them, are in indigenous communities. Yes. And so I think for me, it was very, very important to, even though I'm saying something in the language which may not be, immediately apparent or obvious to people who don't speak it or are not of our community, there are still so many issues that need to be discussed all the time, I think. And that's the only way the needle's actually ever going to move forward. And so, so there's songs about water rights. There's songs about, protest and bringing each other up and government accountability and like all of these things. I actually kind of had a funny story. I was talking about the Governor General's Award thing I did in Ottawa at the National Arts Center.
Right.
So they just like they had listened to the record and they were like, I just I was like, hey, whatever one you want me to come and do, that's totally cool by me. I like them all. They're all my babies, those songs. So so they picked this one called Sugamawit. And the full title is actually Lintuwakonawa Aligazizagamawa, which means the song that you sing at the installation of a new chief. And so this was the title on the original wax cylinder, right? And so all of those titles that are on the record, they're all just coming from from that original wax. But this titles and the song would be sung when the new chief is brought in. So when I was writing this was when Mr. Trudeau was taking office, and so the words are kind of like sort of like we're watching, you know. It's like
Right.
Niganiye and Kutpida Hadamanen which Gwobazi did Nitlayage. So that means Niganiye. When you lead the people, you need to think of everyone. Because the decisions that you make are going to impact the ones yet to come.
It sounds to me that in listening to the archive recordings, you chose to reflect those that like those pieces that still resonated today in terms of or the lyrics that were covering things like water. I mean, it might seem somewhat disconnected to what you're talking about, rather in terms of the original piece's intent, but you saw a way of applying these archive pieces to issues that pertain to now. Is that
totally?
Yeah.
So some of them are that totally, and then also others are just strictly like there's this thing called vocables. I don't know. But I'll just explain for your audience. So vocables are sometimes, these like anthropologists at the time, they'd say nonsense syllables. But it's just for us, it's like chant music. It's just like the words don't necessarily have like a specific meaning or like an obvious lyrical meaning, but they convey spiritual meaning. So a lot of those songs on the archive, they are that. They don't necessarily have language in them.
I see.
But they're the chant. And so oftentimes I'll like, on this record, I'll show a little bit of that. You know, you can actually hear the old archive playing along. And so a lot of those moments are like chant moments. And then there's some lyrical content as well. And then I also worked with like my aunt as well, who's a teacher of the language. And she helped me to craft some of the more lyrical bits as well. Which, because for me, it was like about speaking to a very specific community. And, you know, people are happy, like people are welcome to come and witness. And I knew that doing this kind of project, people would want to come and check it out and see what it sounded like.
Yeah.
But it's for a very specific group of people. And that's Wolastoqiyik. And that's why I kept it in the language too. That, you know, there was some back and forth about whether, you know, maybe I should do these pieces in English, or if I really want to like reach people with the lyrics, you know, maybe that's the best way. But yeah, what I've come to learn, and maybe, you know, this is part of a lesson from classical music too, is like lyric and word is one thing, but the power that music can bring and the meaning that it can convey, I think runs quite a bit deeper. So, and that kind of sounds, I don't know, cheesy, but
no. I mean, it's fair. I can't. Your record, I think, is resonating. Again, you're primarily singing in a language that very few people will understand, and in some cases, as you say, it's not even language; it's sounds. I think that on some level, this record and your work will operate on a really highly emotional level more than potentially an intellectual level for some, because they're going to be feeling things more than processing information on some level. I mean, you tend to contextualize these pieces when you perform live in your banter, and in, I guess, in realms like the one we're in currently. But no, I mean, just listening to the record, it's an emotional experience more than anything else.
I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, that's absolutely the intention. So I'm glad that came through.
Yeah. You did say a few things there that I want to follow up on in terms of the power of this music and its messaging to potentially provoke change. You mentioned the fact that, you know, there are innumerable issues in the indigenous community that aren't addressed. You invoked Trudeau there, the current Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah.
What do you make of the job he's doing as Prime Minister in terms of how it's impacting indigenous communities? Because I know that is an issue that people bring up quite a bit in terms of promises versus actions, platform promises versus what's actually happening. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's the question. There seems to be an amount of like doublespeak. I think that happens, but I think that's nothing new in the in the political game, and I think we are a lot of people got really excited about this nation to nation, because what is at the core of that? That's really talking about like sovereignty,
Yeah.
and that's big talk, but yeah, it doesn't seem like the Canada Corp is interested in these kind of things, buying pipelines and such. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think there's a inherent contradiction, I think, in like the ways that Indigenous communities are being spoken about. But yeah, I do struggle with it quite a bit, and there's a lot of, especially on the East Coast, and that's where a lot of my political focus lies, is actually on the ground, and what's going on in our territories, because there's a lot of resource extraction companies that are trying to come through, and we have the Energy East that has been stalled and put down, but we'll see. There's always another, and so as much as I might have a distaste for the current head of the country, I can be more effective working on the ground in my own communities, I should say,
Yeah.
and trying to just be positive and create change, and so I leave judgment for others and political commentators and people of that sort. For me, my art and this album is political enough just by being.
Yeah.
I really do believe that because of the history of like being silenced and our ceremonies being illegal and these songs being illegal.
Yeah.
I really feel that just even to come and say it now is a statement in itself, and be unapologetic in that, and not asking permission, not crediting a museum or like that's not to say that there were individual archivists that weren't incredibly helpful to get me on this journey and to keep me going, but the systems,
Yeah.
of like what keeps our culture away from us, these things for me need to be challenged, and that's I'm really focused in on that. So I think there's a couple layers of like political discourse that I feel like if I lose focus on my very specific intention, can get tricky.
I appreciate
what
that.
I'm saying?
Yeah, I do appreciate that. And we've talked a lot about duality in this conversation. I mean, you were kind of just referring to that now. And we've talked about cultural duality. Is it am I right, or do you identify as two-spirit?
Yeah, I mean that's it's a tricky word, that one. I'm certainly somebody under the queer umbrella that is indigenous, and so I've gotten an amazing chance to work with like some two-spirited elders and people that have been raised in this way, that their communities didn't have a strong influence of the church, and so these ways of like people in between never went away. These were just strong, and that's how they were raised. And so for me to come in and say, I'm just as two-spirited as they are, I don't know if that's true. The church had a huge influence in our community, and created like really severely enforced gender roles in a lot of our communities. And especially on the East Coast, we've been dealing with colonization, much longer. We bore the brunt of that initial landing, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's so much amazing, even here in Anishinaabe territory, and I just got back from out west, and so many beautiful teachings and people that are still being raised, and coming up, really knowing what it means to be a two-spirited person, because that's a very specific cultural position and role.
How do you yourself define that? I noticed you kind of hedged on it when in terms of as a term, but what is your personal definition then?
Well, I just think it's like, because I hedge on it because it's like a recent term. It's like two spirits. First of all, it's an English term, so it's sort of right away. It's Nijmanidua is the Anishinaabe Moen for two spirit, right?
Okay.
And that's just a literal translation of that term. But I don't come from this territory. I come from the East, right? And so our term, or what I've come to understand it being, is Madaulin. And so, I wasn't raised in those teachings, and but these are it's even going back into the archive and getting to read these stories, it actually talks about these people who were in between and who had that great spiritual power and the ability to see both so yeah, I think for me it's like, and you're asking how do I define it
for yourself. I mean,
right.
These things are some terms like these, like you said, I think you're sort of hinting at this, alluding to the fact that sometimes these terms are foisted upon a people,
yeah,
and they're not. They just have to live with them.
Well, I should say, like, especially with the Two-Spirit one, that one sort of came out in the 90s when, collections of like people, like indigenous queer people in the inner city, either this term actually came in Winnipeg, I do believe, if I know my Two-Spirit history correctly.
Okay.
But it was people from all different nations who were both Native and queer, and they wanted terms to talk about that intersection, and that's sort of what it came, because there was these teachings around these middle people that were of different genders, so it was a way to sort of solidify politically or to be able to talk across, because the common language was English. It wasn't, these people were speaking all different dialects and languages from all over the place. And so there was, I think there was a need for a term to talk about these identities and the confluence of them. But yeah, I would choose, even in my community context, maybe choose to identify with the term in my language rather than something like Two-Spirit, which is it's more of a pan-indigenous term. Yeah, so I don't know. It's a complicated discussion, I guess, but
it is, and I hope it's not off-putting for you to get into it.
No, it's all part of it, It's and I certainly never have hid, who I was, and I knew myself from a very young age, and so I was supported in that way, to just sort of be who I wanted to be, and I think that's so rare.
Well, particularly since it doesn't sound like you had many queer elders to look up to.
Yeah, hugely, and that's one issue, and something I'd like to be part of solving. And so, yeah, I used to do some work with an organization here in Toronto that was creating resources in communities around queer elder mentorship and these kind of things. And so it's something that I'm very, very passionate about. And so I'm happy to talk about it totally. Because I think it's very important, and to maybe even be one day that person that is sort of living that identity and not really ashamed at all to talk about it.
It just, from your music and your scholarship and the cultural work you're doing and your outspokenness, and Jeremy, I feel like you might be a remarkable person. So
okay, I'll need to get that on a t-shirt or something.
Yeah, get it on a t-shirt. Do something with that blurb, because I think no, I appreciate that.
No,
you're just you bring a lot to the table, so to speak, and I appreciate your work, and I appreciate you. What is next for you now that, this is, your profile is as high as it's ever been, I think, and the people are really responding well to the music and the commentary. What do you want to do next?
I guess I'll have to give you a call in a couple of weeks and let you know when I figure it out. I think for me, it was just I had this vision about this record, and I really had to execute it fully. And so I dove in quite deep into the research, into the creation and the recording and all this. It took quite a many years to create this. And so for me, there are still so many stories that have yet to come out. The archive is just one thing that I wanted to address and tackle and talk about.
Yeah. But
there's so many. Not even issues, but just celebrations that need to happen. This is just one iteration of that. But I'm now moving and working with our stories quite a bit, and so I don't know if that's going to turn into like a stage play or a film project or what it's going to be. I just demoed my next recording as well, which is in English. So that's
wow, okay.
Yeah, well, sort of like half and half actually, but yeah, we'll see what that all turns into. I don't know. It's like I'm just sort of, now that I've completed this cycle of work, And I don't, and I say that, and I'm like, no, that's not true. This is not complete. It's like there are still so many iterations, even within this own, archival project of Wolastoqiyik Lintuwakonawa. It's like, yeah, there's so many facets I want to go down. We're now talking with. I did my first orchestra gig a little while ago.
Yeah, you were saying.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I was like, oh gosh, yeah, this is cool. This is really a good feeling to be backed up by that much power. Is really fun. So I'd love to do more of that.
So coming up next, more expensive stuff, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
You need to create a budget, maybe, is what the next step
really
should be.
I'm counting on that Polaris, I guess.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, hopefully that we make it onto you make it onto the short list there. That would be great.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, I guess we find out in this month. Yeah, July 17th.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I mean, honestly, it's like I got to meet Buffy as part of this process backstage at the first announcement.
Yes.
And I was like, nothing else matters. I've met this woman, and yeah, award be damned. But it would be, I mean, for my first project, it would be such a high. I mean, it's already been such a high honor to have it so well received, and I think, yeah, I just can't wait to say something new too. It's yeah, this one was a very specific and personal thing. This is like very much my family. Going back and hearing these old songs. I'm related to some of these people, and so it was a very, very personal project, and one that is very rooted specifically, in my language and my community. But now, yeah, I feel like there's also bigger, broader discussions that ought to be happening too, and so finding ways to contribute and plug into those, I think, is my next iteration.
All right. Well, it's ambitious, as I imagine you will always be. So we all look forward to hearing that. Where can people learn more about you and this record online?
Oh, online. I was like, well, you can come to Toronto. Just come hang out. We'll sit down. We'll have a talk. But no, online. You can go to my website, jeremydutcher.com. There's some tour dates on there, and we're working on putting up some more information about the project, just to explain to people a little bit, because it begs for a little context, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Works. So, but that's good. I think it ought to as well. So,
okay. So jeremydutcher.com, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or that's one good way. If you want to support and purchase some music, the best way to do that is through Bandcamp. That gets artists the most amount of money, or most amount of direct support.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So that's another option. If you're a social media person, I'm terrible at it, but I do try to post when I can. So, yeah, there's a couple entry points, but I'm so happy to go around and talk to people and share this music, and it's been a cool journey. So
you seem like a very open person, and I appreciate that too. That came through when I saw you in Ottawa, that show I was talking about. So,
good.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is there a particular song from this new record that we can play? And time is not an issue per se.
Time is not an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I've been really. I mean, oh gosh, wow, oh geez. I'm just looking at the cover now, and I'm like, oh, which one to pick? I've been listening to Aswanige.
Aswanige?
Yeah, which is the second track on the record.
Okay.
It's called Trading Song. That's sort of or the real title is Let's Trade.
Okay.
So it's talking about exchange. And so there were as part of this archive, there were 3 different trading songs that were part of this thing. And so I wanted to find a way to weave them together a little bit. So it's sort of 3 songs in one, with 3 very different vibes, but I think I hope at least I created one sort of through narrative between these sort of 3 distinct movements. So yeah, and it's a little anyway. I just think I'm proud of the song, and it's really big, in terms of the file that we had to use to create this. This was one of the biggest on the record. So there's a lot of sounds, there's a lot of variation, and I'm just I think it's pretty neat. So. Yeah, I would say that one.
Okay, let's hear it now. This is Aswanige by Jeremy Dutcher. Jeremy, this was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today, and I wish you the best of luck with everything in the future.
Yeah, Vish, it was a total pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
12, 12.
Kwanude, kwanude, hihine. Unalia, kwanude, hihine. Kwanude, kwanude, hihine. Unalia, kwanude, kwanude,
Special thanks to Jeremy Dutcher for appearing on this, the 408th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on all iOS and Android platforms, and also on things like Spotify, YouTube, and Audio Boom. If for some reason you can't find an episode that you're looking for on any of those platforms, or if you wish to learn more about me and sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, everything you will need is at my website, vishkhana.com, vishkhana.com. You can like Creative Control on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at vishcreative, or follow me at vishkhana. You can also listen to a radio show version of Creative Control on Wednesdays at noon Eastern Standard Time around the world at cfru.ca, or on an actual radio at 93.3 FM if you're in or near Guelph. Also, please consider visiting patreon.com/Creative Control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. And for your generosity, I'm happy to send you a t-shirt if that's, I have show t-shirts. And I have other things too. So if you're interested in pledging and you want to ask me for something in return, just let me know on Patreon. There's a way of messaging me. Just do it. Patreon.com/Creative Control. Thanks again to Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, Planet Bean Coffee, Grandad's Donuts, and Planet of Sound for in-kind support of this show. Thanks too to my pal Jim Guthrie for letting me use the instrumental version of his song "The Rest Is Yet to Come" to end the show. That's what you're hearing right now. JimGuthrie.org for more info about Jim. And once again, thanks to you. It means a lot that you listen to this show and review it and rate it positively and download episodes and just spread the word about it. It really does mean a lot, so please continue to do so. I have to go. I'm late for something, so I will talk to you later. Bye for now.